It was a day of pure annihilation waiting to happen. 1,000 Roman shields against a horizon swallowed by 16,000 enemy horsemen. On a searing January morning in 46 BC, history's most celebrated general faced an end. Julius Caesar stood on foreign soil, his elite force encircled not just by men, but by the finest cavalry the ancient world had ever bred. Their mission had been simple: gather food. But it was all a ruse, a masterfully laid trap. And in the next few hours, Caesar would have to invent a new way of war, or watch his legend die in the African dust. Picture the scene: a thin line of Roman red against an ocean of sand and swirling dust. The air vibrated with alien war cries. For every Roman soldier, there were 16 adversaries. No path to safety. No relief column within days of march. Caesar's political existence was hanging by a thread. Back in Rome, vultures circled. One lost battle here, in this barren expanse outside Ruspina, and his enemies would tear apart everything he'd built. This was no ordinary campaign. The civil war was supposed to be over. But the remnants of Pompey's faction, led by the iron-willed Cato and the general Scipio, had rebuilt an army in North Africa. They'd allied with King Juba of Numidia, who provided his legendary horsemen, warriors who lived in the saddle, who could loose arrows with pinpoint accuracy at full gallop. Caesar had marched to crush this last resistance. Instead, he had walked into a slaughterhouse of his own making. The terrain was his enemy's greatest weapon. Endless, open plains where cavalry could flow like water. Roman infantry, trained for the tight forests of Gaul, were like heavy stones in a riverbed here, static, slowly being worn down. The sun was a brutal, coppery disk, baking men inside their metal shells. And Caesar had made fatal miscalculations. His scouts had failed him. He expected a skirmish. What he found was an entire army, commanded by a man who knew all his secrets, Labienus, his former top lieutenant. Labienus had spent months designing this moment. He knew Caesar's aggression was a weakness to be exploited. The foraging party was irresistible bait. And now, the trap was sprung. The Numidian cavalry moved with hypnotic, terrifying grace. They didn't charge, they enveloped. They hovered just beyond the reach of Roman javelins, their arrows falling in relentless, whispering volleys. It was a strategy of exhaustion and fear. For the veterans of the Gallic Wars, this was a nightmare they'd never trained for. How do you fight a ghost that strikes and vanishes? Discipline faced its ultimate test against an arithmetic of doom. The hours stretched under the hammer of the sun. The Roman square held, but it was being bled dry. Wounded men piled up in the center. Water skins ran empty. Every feint, every mock charge by the Numidians drained precious stamina. Labienus was playing a cruel symphony, using his intimate knowledge of Roman drills to probe for weakness. Then, the true purpose of the enemy's movement became clear. They weren't just attacking, they were hurting. Slowly, irresistibly, they pushed Caesar's formation away from the coast, into a natural bowl of rocky hills. The Romans were being driven into their own grave. Here, the cavalry could attack from the high ground while the legionaries struggled in the choking sand. Taunts in broken Latin echoed down. Captured Roman standards were waved in mockery. The psychological warfare was as sharp as the arrows. Caesar's Germanic cavalry, his elite European horsemen, were useless here. Their heavy charges were met with fluid retreats, then swarmed from behind. The situation was beyond desperate. It was a closed equation with only one solution: annihilation. Then Caesar saw something. A flaw in the dance of death surrounding him. In a decision that seemed like madness to every centurion present, he gave an order that defied all Roman military doctrine. He commanded his 1,000 men to break their protective square. Instead, they were to form a single thin line, 4 men deep, stretching across the valley floor. To extend like this in the face of overwhelming cavalry was suicide. It invited total destruction. For 20 minutes of sheer vulnerability, the legionaries redeployed under a rain of arrows. Men fell as they moved. But Caesar, his commander's cloak a bright target, moved down the line, steadying them. He wasn't just gambling. He had identified the critical weakness in the Numidian tactics. Their power came from massing together for concentrated strikes. The extended Roman line, pressed against the valley's rocky flanks, would force them into narrow channels. It would turn their greatest strength, their numbers, into a crowded liability. The first test was violent and immediate. 2,000 Numidian horsemen, seeing the thin Roman line, surged forward for the kill. They followed into the very terrain Caesar had chosen. Suddenly, the open plain was gone. They were squeezed between rock outcrops. And here, the Roman javelin found its range. The legionaries didn't just hold. They gave ground deliberately, drawing the horsemen in deeper, then closed the jaws. The close-quarter slaughter was brutal and swift. Numidian speed meant nothing. For the first time that day, Roman steel met flesh in earnest. The shock of that localized defeat rippled through the Numidian ranks. Caesar's thin line now created multiple, disconnected fights across the valley. Labienus, the master coordinator, could no longer control the battle's rhythm. His cohesive swarm fractured into confused pockets. And in each pocket, Roman discipline began to dominate. The impossible mathematics of 16 to 1 began to crack. But the true masterstroke was still to come. Caesar, watching with a predator's eye, spotted a gap. Labienus, scrambling to reinforce his failing attack, had weakened a section of the encirclement. The window was fleeting, maybe 5 minutes. Caesar took it. Gathering his most trusted veterans, he led the charge himself, on foot, straight for the heart of the opening. The sight of their general risking everything transformed the exhausted legionaries. The line didn't just hold, it became a spear. The collision was catastrophic for the Numidians. Trapped in the gap, their mobility vanished. The Romans pushed through, and the breakthrough triggered a cascade. Seeing their center rupture, the entire Roman line surged forward. The battle inverted in an instant. The hunters became the hunted. The Numidians, warriors bred for hit-and-run warfare, were utterly unprepared for an aggressive infantry advance across open ground. Their morale shattered. What followed was not a battle but a rout. The African sun, which had witnessed their dominance all morning, now watched their disintegration. Roman sentries, moments ago fighting for their lives, were now pursuing fleeing horsemen for miles. The numbers, in the end, told a staggering story. By nightfall, Caesar's 1,000 had slain nearly 4,000 of the enemy. Roman losses were a fraction of that. From the jaws of a perfect trap, Caesar crafted an immortal lesson in tactics. The victory at Ruspina echoed far beyond the dusty valley. Cities across Africa opened their gates to the commander who had defied logic. Enemy alliances crumbled. More importantly, Caesar had rewritten the manual. He proved that disciplined innovation could neutralize any advantage, that the mind of a general was the ultimate weapon. The extended line tactic he invented in desperation became standard Roman doctrine, studied for centuries. He didn't just win a battle, he changed the very art of war. And for us today, it's a powerful reminder. The most profound breakthroughs often come not when everything is going right, but when you are cornered, outnumbered, and staring at the end. It's in that pressure that genius is forged. If you found this story of impossible turnaround compelling, show some love, like this video, and make sure to subscribe to Winds of Thought. We unearth the forgotten turning points where history was rewritten.